The reluctant teacher. Max Torres never planned on becoming an interstellar combat instructor. After retiring from Earth's Special Operations Command at 35, he'd opened a small dojo in New Singapore's Alien Integration District, teaching basic self-defense to human colonists. The last thing he expected was to find himself teaching an 8-foot-tall, scaled alien with a prehensile tail how to throw a proper punch. Yet here he was, watching Scout, his technically still legal spouse thanks to a complicated series of events involving her father's archaic customs, attempt to replicate a basic jab-cross combination. Her powerful tail swished behind her in concentration, nearly knocking over a practice dummy. "Your balance is off," Max said, circling her with his hands clasped behind his back. "You're putting too much weight on your back foot." Scout's iridescent scales shifted colors slightly in frustration. "Human bodies make no sense. 2 legs, no tail, how do you even stay upright?" "The same way I managed to take down 3 Centaurian pirates last week while you were busy trying to hack their ship's computer," Max replied with a slight smirk. "Technique beats raw strength every time." Scout's head frills flattened, her species equivalent of rolling eyes. "That was different. They were drunk, and you threw your hat at them first. Which, by the way, is not a legitimate combat technique." "It worked, didn't it?" Max adjusted her stance, carefully moving her feet with his own. "Besides, anything that gives you an advantage in a real fight is legitimate. That's lesson 1. Their banter was interrupted by the dojo's security system. Red lights pulsed along the ceiling as a holographic display materialized, showing multiple armed figures approaching the building. "Speaking of real fights," Scout said, her scales shifting to a darker shade, "looks like those pirates' friends finally tracked us down." Max retrieved his worn combat hat from its hook on the wall, checking the reinforced edge for sharpness. "Good timing. Nothing teaches proper technique like practical application." "You're not actually going to try teaching me in the middle of a fight, are you?" Scout asked, already moving to retrieve the plasma pistol hidden beneath the training mats. "Best way to learn," Max grinned, pulling his hat low over his eyes. "Consider this your pop quiz on everything we've covered so far." The first explosion rocked the dojo's outer walls, and Max could hear heavy boots on the roof. He moved into a fighting stance, Scout mirroring his position beside him, her form finally starting to look somewhat proper. "Remember," he said as the first pirates began breaking through the skylights, "a good fighter uses whatever advantages they have. You've got scales, strength, and a tail. Use them." Scout's tail coiled like a spring. "What about you? Planning to throw your hat again?" "Of course not," Max replied, watching the pirates land in a circle around them. "That would be predictable. Today, I think I'll throw you instead." Before Scout could protest, the pirates opened fire, and their first real combat lesson began. As Max deflected a blast with his hat's reinforced brim, he realized that teaching might not be so bad after all, especially when your student was a quick learner with natural weapons built in. The trick would be surviving long enough to complete the lesson. Combat applications. The pirate closest to Scout never saw the tail coming. As plasma bolts filled the air, her prehensile appendage whipped out like a steel cable, wrapping around his ankle and yanking his feet out from under him. Just as Max had demonstrated earlier, though he'd used his arms rather than a tail, she followed through with the momentum, sending the pirate flying into 2 of his companions. "Not bad," Max called out, ducking under a wild swing from a brutish Martian colonist with cybernetic arms. "But remember what I said about weight distribution." Scout blocked a punch with her scaled forearm, the attacker's fist making a satisfying clang against her natural armor. "Really? You're critiquing my form now? Best time to learn." Max swept his opponent's legs, simultaneously launching his hat in a tight spiral that caught another pirate in the throat. "Watch your footwork, you're still telegraphing your moves." The fight had spread throughout the dojo, equipment scattered and practice mats upturned. Through the chaos, Scout found herself analyzing the situation differently than she would have before Max's training. Instead of simply relying on her superior strength and natural weapons, she was starting to see the angles, the opportunities, the flow of combat that Max always talked about. A massive Jovian pirate charged her, his low-gravity upbringing evident in his awkward gait. Time seemed to slow as Scout remembered Max's lessons about using an opponent's momentum against them. She sidestepped at the last moment, her tail providing perfect balance as she grabbed the Jovian's arm and redirected his charge, right into the reinforced wall. Now that, Max said appreciatively, catching his returning hat, was proper technique. But their victory celebration was premature. The main doors burst open, revealing a figure that made both of them freeze. Striding through the smoke came Captain Marina Vale, the most notorious pirate queen in the outer colonies. Her cybernetically enhanced eye glowed crimson as she surveyed the scene, her signature phase blade humming to life in her hand. Max Torres, she purred, her accent a strange mix of Earth's old Russian and Titan's colonial drawl. Still teaching dance lessons, I see. Max's expression hardened. Marina. Still bitter about New Mars? Scout looked between them, her scales shifting to a confused purple. You two know each other? Oh, he didn't tell you. Marina's laugh was like breaking glass. Your instructor and I used to be partners. Before he left me for dead in a Martian mining colony. That's not exactly how it happened, Max said, moving subtly into a defensive stance. Though I'm starting to wish it was. Scout's combat training was forgotten for a moment as she processed this revelation. Wait, you were a pirate? Reformed security consultant, Max corrected, never taking his eyes off Marina. And she's leaving out the part where she sold our whole team to corporate slavers. Marina's phase blade crackled with energy. Ancient history. Today, I'm just here for the artifact you stole from my employers. Hand it over, and maybe I'll let your new student keep all her lovely scales. What artifact? Scout demanded, looking at Max, what's she talking about? Max's hand moved to his jacket pocket, where Scout noticed for the first time a slight bulge. Remember what I said about advantages in a real fight? He pulled out what looked like an ancient data crystal, its surface etched with symbols Scout didn't recognize. Sometimes the best advantage is having something your opponent wants. Marina's cybernetic eye flared. Still playing games, I see. Good. I was hoping to do this the hard way. She raised her free hand, and more pirates began rappelling through the broken skylights. Let's see how well you've trained your pet alien. Scout's scales flushed angry red. Pet. Oh, that's it. Max, remember that wrestling move you showed me? The one you said I wasn't ready for? A slight smile crossed Max's face. The suplex? Scout, you'll throw your back out. Watch me. Scout's tail coiled like a spring. Unless you'd rather explain why you're carrying stolen artifacts while teaching me how to punch properly. Fair point. Max flipped his hat back onto his head. Marina, you should know, she's a very quick study. What followed would later be described by witnesses in New Singapore's Alien Quarter as the most spectacular application of human wrestling techniques to alien physiology ever documented. As Marina charged forward, her phase blade leaving trails of light in the air, Scout demonstrated just how well she'd been paying attention to Max's lessons, even the ones he thought she was ignoring. The resulting suplex not only threw Marina through a wall but also proved that alien tail muscles were, in fact, perfectly suited for advanced grappling techniques. Unfortunately, it also attracted the attention of every law enforcement drone in a 3-block radius. As alarms began blaring outside, Max grabbed Scout's arm. Time for lesson 2, he said, already running for the secret exit he'd installed behind the weapons rack. What's lesson 2? Scout asked, following close behind as Marina's furious screams echoed through the ruined dojo. Max grinned, pulling the data crystal from his pocket. Advanced evasion techniques. And maybe, if we survive, I'll explain what's on this thing that's worth bringing down the wrath of the galaxy's most dangerous pirate queen. I thought you said no more secrets, Scout protested as they emerged into New Singapore's neon-lit back alleys. Consider it part of your education, Max replied. Sometimes the best fights are the ones you avoid entirely. Now run. Behind them, Marina's threats faded into the city's ambient chaos, but Scout had a feeling their next lesson would involve a lot more than just proper punching technique. As they disappeared into the crowded streets, she realized that learning to fight like a human was turning out to be far more complicated, and dangerous, than she'd ever imagined. Hidden motives. First rule of evasion, Max said as they ducked into a cramped maintenance tunnel beneath New Singapore's bustling night market, is knowing when to stop running. Scout's tail barely fit in the narrow space, scraping against rusted pipes. And when's that exactly? When you've led your pursuers exactly where you want them. Max pressed his hand against a seemingly random section of wall, revealing a hidden scanner. A moment later, the wall slid open, exposing a small but well-equipped safe room. Welcome to my other dojo. The space was smaller than their regular training area but packed with weapons, surveillance equipment, and what looked like enough supplies to survive a small war. Scout's scales shifted to an impressed blue-green. So, she said, watching Max secure the entrance, were you planning to mention you're some kind of master spy, or was that going to be a surprise practical exam? Max placed the mysterious data crystal in a shielded container. Ex-spy, technically. And I was hoping to save this particular lesson for later. He turned to face her, his expression serious. You're ready for more advanced training. What happened back there proved it. The suplex? Scout's head frills lifted with pride. I told you I could do it. Not just that. You adapted. Used your natural abilities in combination with what I taught you. That's what real combat mastery is about. He gestured to a worn training mat in the corner. Which is why it's time I taught you something that might save your life when Marina catches up to us. When, not if. She's persistent. And now that she knows about you, she'll see you as either a potential asset or a threat to be eliminated. Max removed his hat, setting it carefully on a weapon rack. So. Ready to learn how humans turn disadvantages into advantages? Scout moved to the mat, her curiosity overwhelming her lingering frustration about Max's secrets. Is this going to involve more wrestling? Because I'm starting to think you humans are oddly fixated on grappling. Better. Max took a stance she hadn't seen before, his weight distributed differently than in their previous lessons. I'm going to teach you Aikido. The art of using an opponent's force against them. Like what I did with the Jovian. That was instinct. This is science. Max motioned her forward. Try to hit me. Full strength. Scout hesitated. Last time you said that, I ended up learning about momentum the hard way. Trust me. She did, despite everything. Her punch was perfect, just as he'd taught her. Power generated from her hips, tail providing counterbalance, no telegraphing. But instead of blocking or dodging, Max seemed to melt away from the strike. His hands made minimal contact with her arm, and suddenly Scout was flying through the air, landing flat on her back. What just? She blinked up at him. How? Aikido. Max helped her up. The founder developed it as a way for smaller fighters to defeat larger opponents. Perfect for humans dealing with physically superior aliens. Or aliens dealing with annoyingly skilled humans. Exactly. Max smiled. Now, watch carefully. The key is to blend with the attack, redirect it, and... The lesson was interrupted by a soft chime from the surveillance system. On the monitors, they watched a group of figures in corporate security uniforms moving through the market above. Not pirates, Scout observed. Friends of yours? Worse. Centauri Corporation's elite recovery team. Max's jaw tightened. They must have tracked the crystal's energy signature. About that crystal. Scout crossed her arms. Time for some answers. Max checked his weapons while keeping an eye on the monitors. Short version. It's ancient Earth tech. Pre-collapse. Contains blueprints for something that could change the balance of power in the galaxy. And you stole it? Retrieved it. From people who would use it to ensure humans stay on top of the interstellar food chain. He met her eyes. Not all of us believe in human supremacy. Scout's scales rippled with conflicting emotions. So all this training, teaching me human fighting techniques, was genuine. Is genuine. Max tossed her a sleek combat vest. I believe sharing knowledge is the best way to ensure no species gains too much power over others. That's why I started teaching in the first place. And Marina? Works for the highest bidder. Right now, that's Centauri Corporation. He checked the monitors again. They're getting closer. Want to help me save the galaxy from corporate tyranny? Scout secured the vest, her tail swishing thoughtfully. Only if you promise two things. First, no more secrets. Second. Her scales shifted to a determined orange. You teach me everything you know. Not just the basics. Deal. Max retrieved his hat. Starting with Lesson 1 of Advanced Combat Philosophy, sometimes the best fight is creating chaos and escaping in the confusion. He pointed to the market's power distribution hub on the monitors. Scout grinned as she recognized the potential for mayhem. Let me guess, she said, cracking her knuckles. This is where those Aikido principles come in handy. Actually, Max pressed a button, opening a different hidden door. This is where I teach you about explosives. Aikido comes after we survive the next 10 minutes. As they prepared to unleash havoc on their pursuers, Scout realized that learning to fight like a human involved far more than just throwing punches. It was about understanding when to fight, when to run, and most importantly, when to turn the entire situation upside down. The real question was, whose side would they be fighting on when the dust settled? Escalation. The night market erupted into chaos precisely 3 minutes after Max finished explaining the basics of tactical demolitions. Scout had to admit, humans might lack natural weapons, but they more than made up for it with creative applications of technology. Remember, Max said as they emerged through a vendor's stall while emergency sirens wailed, explosions are like punches. It's all about timing and placement. Is everything a fighting metaphor with you? Scout's tail swatted away a falling neon sign. Pretty much. Duck. She did, just as a corporate security drone whizzed overhead, its sensors confused by the multiple heat signatures from the burning power hub. The market's civilian shoppers had mostly fled, leaving an eerie maze of abandoned stalls and flickering holograms. They're trying to hurt us, Scout noted, recognizing the security team's movement patterns on her tactical visor. Using standard Centauri containment protocols. Max raised an eyebrow. You're familiar with corporate tactics? Did some consulting work. Before the whole arranged marriage thing. She paused behind a food stall, scales shifting to match the shadows. Speaking of things we should have discussed earlier. The marriage was your father's idea. I meant the crystal. Scout's head frills flattened. You said it's pre-collapse tech. How pre are we talking? Max checked their escape route, his expression grim. Early 21st century. Before the AI wars, before the mass evacuations. Back when humans were still figuring out quantum computing. That's impossible. Nothing survived from that era except, Scout's scales paled. No. Please tell me you didn't steal the emergency archive. The sound of heavy boots on metal catwalks above them grew closer. Max pulled Scout into a darker alcove, speaking quickly and quietly. Not the whole archive. Just the weapons research section. He held up the crystal. Specifically, the theoretical physics division's work on dimensional manipulation. Dimensional. Scout's tail went rigid. You're talking about the Gate project. The one that supposedly drove the first AI mad. The very same. Turns out it wasn't madness, it was enlightenment. The AI saw something in those calculations, something that scared it enough to start the wars. Max's eyes gleamed with intensity she'd never seen before. But it missed a crucial detail. Something only an organic mind could grasp. A spotlight swept past their hiding spot. Scout noticed Max's hand moving to one of the small explosives on his belt. "Why tell me this now?" she whispered. "Because in about 30 seconds, we're either going to die or make history." He pressed the crystal into her hand. "And if it's the former, someone needs to know the truth. The core aren't just fighting for profit anymore. They're trying to access other dimensions. And that's bad. Remember what I taught you about reading an opponent's intentions?" Max peered around the corner. "Apply that to corporations who want to exploit entire alternate realities." Scout's combat training kicked in as she processed the implications. "So we're not just running from Marina and Corp security. We're trying to prevent a second collapse. Now you're thinking like a tactical instructor." Max grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Ready for your final exam?" Before Scout could answer, the air split with the distinctive whine of Marina's phase blade. The pirate queen descended from above, her cybernetic eye blazing. "Class is over," Marina announced. Corporate troops rappelled down behind her, weapons trained on the pair. "Hand over the crystal, and I'll ensure your deaths are quick. Resist." Her blade hummed louder. "Well, let's just say I've learned a few teaching techniques of my own." Scout looked at the crystal in her hand, then at Max. In that moment, all their training sessions, all his lessons about reading situations and turning disadvantages into advantages, crystallized into perfect clarity. "Max," she said calmly, "remember what you taught me about misdirection?" His eyes widened slightly as he caught her meaning. "Scout, no. It's too risky. Trust your student." Her scales shifted to a deep, determined red. Sometimes the best technique is the one your opponent never sees coming. Before anyone could react, Scout did something that violated at least 3 laws of physics and several corporate regulations. She swallowed the crystal. Marina's face contorted with rage. "Shoot them both. We'll cut it out of her corpse." "Actually," Max said, already moving, "that's not how Crixian digestive systems work." "Scout." Scout's scales began to glow with an inner light as the crystal's energy merged with her biological systems. "Did I mention my species can temporarily absorb and channel quantum energies?" "No," Marina stepped back, her confidence wavering for the first time. "That's not possible." "Funny thing about impossible," Max threw his hat, scattering the corporate troops. "It's just another word for something you haven't trained for." What followed was either the most impressive display of combined human and alien combat techniques in recorded history, or the galaxy's most expensive light show. Scout's energized scales released pulses of quantum energy with every strike, while Max's explosives created a symphony of synchronized chaos. But even as they fought, Scout felt the crystal's power burning through her system. They had minutes, at most, before either the crystal's energy killed her or its secrets were lost forever. "Max!" She called out between devastating tail strikes. "Remember what you said about other dimensions?" He caught his returning hat, understanding dawning on his face. "You're not serious. Got a better idea?" Marina, realizing what they were planning, raised her blade. "Kill them now." But it was too late. Scout grabbed Max, her scales now blazing with dimensional energy. "Time for one last lesson," she grinned. "How to exit a fight in style." The last thing Marina saw before reality itself tore open was Max Torres, the the galaxy's most unorthodox combat instructor, tipping his hat in farewell. Then everything went quantum. New dimensions. Reality, Max discovered, tasted like copper and smelled like ozone. The quantum tunnel Scout had torn open deposited them somewhere that looked like New Singapore's night market, if it had been designed by a mathematician having a fever dream. Well, he steadied himself against what might have been a wall. That's one way to end a fight. Scout's scales were still glowing, but the light had dimmed to a soft pulse. Did we make it? Define make it. Max gestured at their surroundings, where geometry seemed more like a polite suggestion than a rule. Because if you meant escape certain death, then yes. If you meant arrive somewhere safe and logical, that's debatable. They stood in a version of the market where paths curved upward into impossible spirals, and vendor stalls sold items that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously. The air itself felt charged with potential. The crystal's energy is fading, Scout reported, her voice strained. But I can feel everything. Max, I think I understand what scared that ancient AI. Reality isn't what we think it is. It's more like a martial art, Max finished, watching patterns emerge in the chaos around them. It's all about flow, balance, and redirecting energy. The universe doesn't just follow rules, it adapts to them, finds ways around them. Like a fighter learning to use their opponent's strength against them. Scout's scales flickered. But there's something else. Something wrong. As if in response to her words, the dimensional fabric around them shuddered. In the distance, where physics grew even more uncertain, massive shapes moved with disturbing purpose. We're not alone here, Max realized. The core weren't just trying to access other dimensions. They were trying to contact whatever lives in them. Scout's tail lashed nervously. And now we've given them a way in. The crystal, my powers, we've created a bridge. No, Max's expression hardened. We've created an opportunity. Remember what I taught you about turning disadvantages into advantages? This seems a little beyond basic combat philosophy. Is it? Max retrieved his hat, which had somehow acquired a slight dimensional shimmer. Every technique I taught you was about understanding energy, reading situations, and finding balance. This is just a bigger arena. The shapes in the distance grew closer, resolving into forms that hurt the eyes to look at. Scout dropped into a fighting stance, her glowing scales reflecting off surfaces that shouldn't exist. So what's the plan? Fight interdimensional beings with Aikido? Better. Max smiled. We're going to teach them. Teach them? They're elder beings from another dimension. Exactly. And what's the first thing I taught you about fighting? Scout's scales shifted to a thoughtful blue. That technique beats raw strength. And the best fighters are the ones who learn to work with their opponents, not just against them. Her eyes widened. You want to show them how to interact with our reality without destroying it. Now you're thinking like an instructor. Max adjusted his stance as the entities approached. Besides, if they're anything like that ancient AI, they're not hostile, just scared and confused by a reality they don't understand. The dimensional beings surrounded them, their presence bending space itself. Scout felt the last of the crystal's energy surge through her system. Ready for your final lesson? Max asked. I thought the market fight was my final lesson. That was the final test. This? He gestured at the impossible scene around them. This is graduation. What followed would have been impossible to describe in normal space-time. Scout and Max demonstrated every technique they'd practiced, not with violence but with purpose. Each movement was a lesson in interaction, each stance a demonstration of balance between realities. Scout's tail became a brush painting physics across dimensional boundaries. Max's carefully controlled techniques showed paths of least resistance through spacetime. Together, they created a new form of combat art, one designed not to defeat, but to communicate. Slowly, the elder beings began to mirror their movements. Reality stabilized around them, finding equilibrium between different dimensional states. The crystal's energy, instead of fading, spread outward, creating permanent bridges of understanding. You know what this means, Scout said as the last of the quantum energy synchronized. The core will never stop trying to access this place. Good thing they'll have some experienced instructors to show them the proper way. Max straightened his hat. Assuming you're interested in continuing your teaching career. Scout's scales shifted to a proud golden hue. Well, I did learn from the best. Even if his training methods were a bit unconventional. Speaking of unconventional. Max gestured at a dimensional ripple that looked suspiciously like a door. Ready to show Marina what real interdimensional combat looks like. Actually, Scout's tail coiled mischievously, I was thinking we might invite her to join the class. After all. She mimicked his instructor tone perfectly. The best way to defeat an enemy is to turn them into a student. Max laughed. Now who's the teacher? Together, they stepped through the dimensional door, ready to face whatever waited on the other side. After all, as Max always said, every fight was just another lesson, and they had a whole universe of new students waiting to learn. And somewhere in the quantum space between dimensions, the ancient AI that had started it all watched with something like approval. Sometimes, it mused, the best way to prevent a war was to start a school instead.